with the focus on Lesotho, of course, but I mean, we're not limited to talk about Lesotho. So I think, first of all, share with us why you are particularly interested in this conversation.
Thank you so much, DK, for having me. It's an important conversation to have, obviously, and I think in this time of lockdown, there's just so much hanging precariously in balance, and people really don't know what's going to happen. I think it would be good to sort of look at, personal economic systems and ecosystems of people, and also just look at just how this pandemic is going to affect nations and people globally. As you said, I'm a serial entrepreneur, so I have multiple interests in business. I started when I was very, very young. I was about 26 when I started in business, and I've learned so much through my journey. Entrepreneurship is it's extreme sports, and so it has become an area that I am very, very passionate about. Well, maybe the best place for me to preamble is by just defining what entrepreneurship is. There's so many definitions of what it is out there, but I think for me, the one that I really espouse is the fact that really what entrepreneurship is solutions to problems. Do you know what I mean? Every day we are confronted with different quandaries and different, dilemmas, and people go out of their way to monetize and commercialize, by providing commercial solutions to those problems. So it's basically using the apparatus of business to solve problems. Okay, and I think it's quite important that, because there's so many dilemmas, and there's talk about different branches of entrepreneurship, like social entrepreneurship. People always say, okay, am I in business for profit or to make money? For me, I always say it doesn't really matter what comes first, the problem or the money, but there is a solution that you need to provide to a real tangible problem. The other thing that I think is equally important is for us to understand that people have been enterprising throughout generations. So entrepreneurship is not a new thing. It's a new concept, but it's not a new thing. So if you look at from the time of our ancestors as hunter-gatherers to agricultural era, or the industrial age that moved into industry, that moved into banking and commerce, and now we find ourselves in this entrepreneurial era, which has become really an age in itself. So we're talking about entrepreneurial economy. And this is really, really important, because it means that there is a lot of changes that are happening in economies. And so you have to be cognizant of what era we are in, and what really precipitated the changes in economy, or that brought us and ushered us into the era of entrepreneurship is mostly, changes in and movements in capital. It's, changes in the labor market. So the knowledge worker has decided that, I don't want to just work for, a boss. I have enough knowledge base for me to start my own thing. And also what really has precipitated this as well is technology. There is so much technological innovation in the world today that really has made people aware of the fact that they can run their own businesses. And capital, now with the changes in capital as well, capital is more accessible than it was previously. And so really, for me, it has really ushered us into a very good space. Yeah.
All right, thanks. So I think before we get to the crux of the matter today, I think it's quite interesting, how you shared around how entrepreneurship has evolved over the years, and reading in the history of Lesotho, and how Basotho used to trade, and how that trade has changed over the years, has also been interesting. So, which brings us to today, where we are today. And I want to read like what the profile of entrepreneurship looks like in Lesotho today. So if we think about the business sector as a whole, you know, we have three different, I would say, levels of entrepreneurship or of business. You know, you have the informal sector, or informal traders. Then you have your SMMEs, who are more, you know, I'd say registered businesses really, who form actually the bigger part of our business landscape in Lesotho. I think together with the informal sector, I think they form what, 85%. And then you have at the very bottom, or the very small majority, the large corporations, and the multinationals, you know, large Lesotho corporations and then the multinationals. And it was very interesting for me to find that that was actually done of what these people look like, the SME sector in particular looked like in Lesotho. And I'm just gonna read and just have you engage with that. So they found that a lot of the SMMEs are survivalists, which means that they have, you know, limited potential for growth and expansion. A third of them are just owners with no employees, and another third are owners with maybe 1 or 2 employees. And then 80% of the businesses that were surveyed in the study had an annual turnover that is below 200,000. And then less than 4% reported like a turnover that's above 1 million a year. And then majority are retailers, or they're in the service sector. So a lot of them are probably just resellers, you know, of things, and not really producers of things. Only over half are like registered with the LRA, and then most businesses produce for the local market. So only 3% produce for large businesses and for export. Which, I mean, for me is so interesting, because Lesotho is an economy of 2 million people. So if all these businesses that exist are producing for these 2 million people, then obviously that raises a lot of challenges. And then their use of technology was also reported to be very unsophisticated. So this is the backdrop and that we have under which we're having this discussion. And I want to hear your views on that.
Yeah, so interestingly enough, my MBA thesis was on this topic. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. And so look, in any market, there are 3 sort of factors that drive the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So you would have capital, which, I mean, everyone talks about it. There is access to markets and skills development. So these elements or these factors really affect how the whole entrepreneurial ecosystem in a country. And Lesotho is no different. I mean, the stats that you just shared there are quite grim in terms of how structured, formalized, and sophisticated our entrepreneurial landscape is. The thing about it is, DK, also you have to understand that, and this really speaks to where business is, and also the partnership between business and policymakers. What you find in Africa is that a lot of governments are pushing the youth to get into business, and literally the population. And the reason why that is because Africa has what we call a youth bulge. So a youth bulge basically is you'll find that the median population is very low. For instance, in Lesotho is like 21, and over 60% of the population survivalist or essential or microeconomic entrepreneurship. This is in contrast to what we call high growth or opportunity-based entrepreneurship. So a lot of it, you find people that are self-funded that cannot scale in any way because they don't have mechanics and systems in place that enable that business to really grow. And I'm actually quite passionate about providing solutions that make sense, that are built on real frameworks and structural pillars of the economy. For instance, I think the whole youth entrepreneurship for me is a bit of a fallacy in that because we have this huge problem of youth unemployment. It's not only just unemployment; it's structural unemployment. It's also speaks of unemployability of the youth as well. And so because we haven't, it means that this has been, constituted and precipitated by so many different things that we can talk about. But because the previous generations have not really prepared for exponential growth in population, what we're doing is we're trying to provide simple answer to complex problems. So we have this, graduates that are coming out of universities and we don't have employment for them. So we're telling them, guys, get into business. But we realize that we don't have the levers to actually support them into getting into business. Because truly speaking, what youth need is actually quality jobs, because it's in the quality jobs that you are going to develop entrepreneurs of the future and industrialists of the future. So when somebody comes into a job, they come to learn skills to drive business. They come to learn the different moving parts of business so that they can start their own businesses. They come to learn about corporate culture. They come to learn true leadership. What does it mean to be a good boss? Do you understand? What does it mean what is the difference between a good and a bad boss? And also, if you have a bad boss, but you're still expected to show up every day, to develop those kind of professional disciplines, to go out on a Sunday night and come home at 4 a.m., but still show up at work at 8 a.m. So that you need to socialize the youth through real time, tangible jobs. And this is not to say that governments should not be investing in the youth. Does that mean youth entrepreneurship is a complete fallacy? No, God forbid. What I'm saying is that it's still going to take the 10,000 hour principle. So basically what that principle is, it says that it's going to take you about 10 years for you to be good at anything that you're doing, whether it's business, sport, music, whatever. So if you really want to invest in the youth and youth entrepreneurship, it says that you have to invest them as a long-term strategy of your country, and not just to try to provide a short-term solution to the unemployment problem. So how does that look like? This looks like co-working spaces. This looks like tax incentives for youth and startup economy. This looks like incubation and accelerator programs that will usher the youth, already them at least into being bona fide and serious entrepreneurs. Because I'll tell you what, there is this romanticized notion of entrepreneurship in that it's a be all and all, and it's as if it's a novel concept. But as I said earlier, there's nothing new. There's nothing new. The tenets of entrepreneurship do not change. The risk factors, how tough it is, the lack of security, and the stability that comes with that. So you need to really be able to invest in your young population for you to literally now start getting into higher levels of performance as far as business and economies are concerned. So what for me, and it's some of the things that we'll talk about that I want to propose as a concept is raising emergent entrepreneurs. What do I mean by emergent entrepreneurs? So this has nothing to do with age. For instance, I got into business when I was 26. I'm 39 now. I can bet on myself better now than when I was young, because you see, this is how things work. So for you to start a business, you're going to need capital. How am I going to raise capital? So there's 3 places where you can raise capital: the founder, friends and family. Those are 3 F's. So those are cheap ways of raising capital. And then there is external investors, which becomes very, it's not the easiest thing. But so when you talk about emergent entrepreneurs, you're saying that if this person is getting to business the first time, then they are emergent. It doesn't matter whether they are 20, 26 or 50. Do you understand? But the good thing about somebody who has gone through the corporate culture and has had a professional career is that they have relationships with banks. They have personal savings. That's how you start a business. Most people, 80% of businesses have started through personal savings. So that person can use their own money to start a business. Not only that, older people have bank accounts, okay? Their bank statement is richer than somebody who is coming out of, university, and their statement is just, statement NMDS. Do you understand? Their statement is rich, so it's easier to even approach external funders for capital. So what I see happening in more developed worlds, like Scandinavian countries, you realize that they are actually even encouraging their people to retire early. And they literally get, say, for instance, there are incentives to retire early, so your money will not be taxed, and you can take that and use it as your capital, right? Older people are more experienced in life, so they don't pose a moral hazard in that they're going to take money, and if I'm an investor, the first money that I give them, they're not going to buy a German car, but they are literally going to invest it in the business because they are more responsible. They're more responsible as adults. You know what I mean? And so this are some of the conversations that we need to start having in terms of enhancing the value of the value chains and the sort of the currency of our businesses.
Okay, great. I think that brings us into the different elements of what a healthy ecosystem looks like. And I think you just spoken there a lot around the capital and the financing of businesses, right? So I want us, the youth conversation, I want us to have it, especially at the end when we talk about the opportunities that exist in terms of how we can develop our ecosystem. And I'd like us to talk now about the different elements of the ecosystem that you mentioned, which you said, was around the policymakers and regulators, the financial actors, then the educational institutions, or the skills developers, really. And then we'll talk about market access individually, and then we'll talk about the other smaller, aspects. So let's talk first about the government and the role that the government has to play in creating a healthy entrepreneurial ecosystem. I know that this is something that we talk about a lot because I think in Lesotho in particular, we love to put everything on the government. Yeah. And I want us today, I guess, to clarify what the role of government is. We talk of things like the ease of doing business index. We talk about, different regulations. I think when the national reforms that are taking place or have to take place at the moment, there's a lot of regulations that need to be updated there in order to assist, the business ecosystem as part of, everything else in the country. So I want us to talk about what is the role of government.
Okay, so I am going to maybe to answer that question, I want to maybe let us talk about the economy so that I can frame your question just using the economy of Lesotho and the way it's structured. So first, maybe if I can give a definition of what economy is. I'm not an economist, so I'm going to give a very simple definition of what the economy is to sort of frame my response. So you have an economy, and I would like to propose that a simple definition that an economy is a system, okay? It's a system that is run by capital and undergirded by labor, okay? Now, in that system, what happens in that system? So it is about production, distribution, and consumption of goods, okay? Now, to your point, you have government, and government are policymakers, okay? So you use policy to manipulate that system, the economy, to give your people economic advantage, okay? So that's really the role of government as far as the economy is concerned, because remember, as people, we have a social contract with the government to say, government, we give you the carte blanche to do and to transact on our behalf, okay? Now, let's talk about the Lesotho economy for us to lead to the different elements of the entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we talk of the economy, there's the three factors that I want to introduce. The macroeconomic factor, the microeconomic factor, and the mesoeconomic dynamic, okay? More often than not, we always focus on the macro and the microeconomic factors. You know, that's what we speak about most of the time. And for me, for Lesotho, that is, I mean, we don't even go into a deep discussion of that. You just need to do a pestle analysis of the macroeconomic factor in Lesotho to see where we are. Look at where our politics are. Look at where the economy is. I mean, we are a 15 billion Maloti slash ZAR national budget country, you know, and that's not even, you know, probably the budget of one of the small municipalities in the Free State, in Bloemfontein. So we are very, very small economy. Just in the micro context, the other day I heard that, you know, we have a 50% poverty prevalence rate in the country. You know, I mean, like, that's so high. So it gives you an idea of how destitute the country is. It gives you an idea of people's personal ecosystems, the sort of things that people struggle with at micro level. And it's not surprising for Lesotho because generally the micro is a reflection of the bigger picture. If you are in a country that has trouble, lack of political capital, or has a troubled political economy, that will trickle down. It will have a cascading effect on to the macroeconomic, you know, outlook of the country. But the thing that I want to talk about now and want to really focus is the mesoeconomic dynamics in Lesotho. What do I mean by mesoeconomic dynamics? So this is economic factors that transcend the micro and the macro outlook of a country. This is the structural patterns and structural dynamics of our economy, okay? So what do I mean by that? We're looking at the design and architecture of the economy of Lesotho, okay? And in architecture, there is a concept and a principle that they call structural integrity, okay? So if we're building a bridge, can this bridge does it have pillars that can sustain this bridge? Does it have pillars for pedestrians and to support the weight of pedestrians and the cars that are going to you know, use this bridge? And I think for me, that herein lies the challenge of the economy of Lesotho. It's structural. It's structural. And I personally feel that we have an externalized economic sovereignty. What do I mean by that? So Lesotho is a kingdom. We are you know, an independent sovereign country, but when it comes to the economy, it's externalized. What do I mean? Leading again to your question. It is known that we are a net importer of goods and services, and it's apparently at 95%, okay? If it's at 95%, and I think a lot of it really from South Africa at 86% or so, I understand. It then says, guys, goods and services translate into money, okay? You take money and you put the money into the bank, okay? Mm. And then now we say, who owns the banks? Because whoever owns the banks and controls the money owns the economy, okay? And so for me then, going back to your question is to say, let's talk about capital, okay? As an element of entrepreneurial or an integral element of an entrepreneurial ecosystem. Cool. So let's see how that looks for for Lesotho. I know I said a lot for me to arrive to here, but I felt like it was necessary. I don't know if you want to chip in before I go on.
Yeah, I think if we summarize, everything that you said, the government's role really should be to make policies, to make enabling policies so that people can do business, right?
Yes.
And so that people can do the right kind of business. And what we
Yes.
have in Lesotho, if we're to analyze, is the government plays a bigger role than that. The government is actually one of the biggest consumers in the country. So a lot of business actually do a lot of business with government.
Yes.
One of the challenges that arose now with COVID-19, which we'll discuss a bit later, is how businesses have been so affected that they're now calling for the government to basically pay them what they owe them, because the government is indebted to so many, or the government also many businesses, right? So we see the need for the government to play a better role of making policies and making it easy for businesses to engage in business, or for entrepreneurs to do business. I remember one forum that I attended, a youth entrepreneurship forum, where some of the young entrepreneurs were sharing how, like, one of them I think was in a tech business, and they were saying, up until now I haven't even registered my business because I'm told there's no code for that type of business that I am engaging in. And if anyone doesn't know what code is, it just means when you go there and you fill in the form, you have to specify a certain code, which is in the regulations. So if you're doing professional services, there's a code number, so and so. So because that sort of business was not there when that act or that regulation was made up, then it means people are not registered, because there's no code. So those are some of the areas where I think, our government can play a better role. But I also think, business also has to play a better role, because the government actually should just make it easy and then get out of the way and allow businesses to engage as business. So I want us to talk about the other that we spoke about financial institutions or financiers, access to capital really for entrepreneurs. And we know that that's one of the biggest challenges in the country. And a lot of entrepreneurs actually think that banks need to be given them finance. But if you think about the business model of a bank, people that put money in the bank are people like you and me. We deposit our money in the bank and we expect that every time we go and withdraw money, it's available for us to withdraw. We don't want the bank to say, well, I've borrowed it to Fanana and his business hasn't broken even yet, so he hasn't started paying us back, so please wait for your money, right? So banks are not really the people that we need to be looking at to finance entrepreneurship in that sense. They can finance well-established businesses that have security or collateral, that have assets, that are very low risk businesses. So I think access to capital is a big area, and I know that you're quite interested in this area as well. So the opportunities are there, or what opportunities exist, and what the need is for access to capital in the country.
Sure. So the biggest mistake that sometimes we make is to think that you can't start a business if you don't have capital. Yes, capital is essential, but capital is actually more, especially external risk capital finance, which is coming from investors or coming from third parties, is actually more essential when you want to scale your business. Okay. Now, to go back to the situation in Lesotho, we said that government or policymakers are there to make sure that they use policy to give people like you and I the opportunity to trade and have economic advantage, right? So this is to provide an enabling environment for business to thrive. Okay, so the challenge with Lesotho is that, as I've said, from a structural point of view of the economy, is that we lack some of those institutions of developmental capital and supply of money. What we have in the market is commercial banks. And as you rightfully say, the business model for commercial banks is profit. It is profit, and not only that, the ones that we have in the country are South African banks, okay? Except for Postbank, of course. I'll speak about that. But you have the biggest, the biggest bank in Lesotho that had by market share owns almost close to 66 to 70% of the market, and it's a South African bank. Now, when you look at the mandate of banks, the banks have to satisfy the mandate of their shareholders. So this is meant to create value for their shareholders. So if you then have banks that are not innately your banks, it means that the CEO of a local bank in Lesotho has 3 other CEOs at the headquarters that he reports to. Do you understand? But it also means that those banks cannot be fully aligned to the developmental objectives of your country. They can try, they will, because banks are very highly regulated, so CBL will regulate them to the best financial standards that are there, but don't get me wrong, they will be aligned to where they come from. And so for me, again, that is a policy issue. What are we going to do to make sure that we own the capital? As I said, goods and services translate into money. Money is put into the bank. And when it's in there, it's controlled by somebody else. And that somebody else is really the one that owns the economy, not you, okay? And that's what I mean by externalized economic sovereignty. If you look at countries that have grown significantly, for instance, in Africa, like Ethiopia. Ethiopia always has double-digit figures when it comes to economic growth. Ethiopia does not have foreign banks. It says that it's not that we don't want foreign banks, it's because we know that our own financial institutions and our own banks cannot compete. So we'll only open our doors to foreign banks when our banks are at par with everybody else. Look at Postbank. Postbank was supposed to be the bank for the unbanked. Do you understand? And so now it is turned into a retail bank. It is our own bank that we say we own 100%. But for it to come to a certain par and level to compete with the other banks from a technology point of view, from asset base point of view, it's a long way. It's a long way. Again, this is why we say that how do we fix those kind of challenges, which for me, again, are structural challenges in order for us to be able to have a supply of capital and money. So there will be, capital will always be the one thing that every entrepreneur or every ecosystem will always complain about. There is no capital. But I think for Lesotho really, it's going to be a long way. We need to start having our own development institutions of capital. We need to start having venture capitalist industry, private equity industry, as well as supply chain finance and the different, portfolio or basket of products, financial products for us to be able to really see a difference. So I think that speaks of capital. Then there's issue of institutions, right? We spoke about institutions. Again, if you want to, we are in an entrepreneurial era, and entrepreneurial economy is a big thing. That means that governments themselves and the institutions in the country have to be entrepreneurial. You and I can try to be entrepreneurs, but if institutions like your LNDC are not entrepreneurial, and you can't assume that because they are tasked with the economy, they're entrepreneurial. If both public and private institutions are not entrepreneurial, then you are not going to go far, especially in Lesotho, where you look at institutions in the private sector that constitute the private sector are actually multinational enterprises, okay? Majority of them coming from South Africa. Good and dandy, they provide us with jobs, quality jobs at least, but again, the people that own those businesses are the ones that are actually creating value and enjoying the benefit and the value that comes out of those businesses. It doesn't mean that in any healthy economy, obviously we know that there is there is a place for FDI, for foreign direct investment. So you're not saying that you don't need international institutions or multinational enterprises. No, what you're saying is that you have to have some sort of a structure that is able to localize and indigenize your institutions and your economy, because that's when you are going to start raising industrialists. Other than that, then the locals will never be able to compete. Okay, they'll never be able to compete because they have to compete with foreign incoming capital, which they don't have, which they can never match because there is also no capital in the market. Secondly, you are taking and muzzling a market. Lesotho, 2 million people, it's a very small market. By the time that your people are able to raise capital in any way or form that they can, they will not have a market. Do you understand? They will not have a market. So for me, again, it goes back to how do we localize the economy such that our institutions, as well as the local market, is owned by us. You also spoke of, I think, policy. I think we said that the whole purpose of policy really is to give your people advantage. So we can maybe cut it on here. We'll talk about education maybe later in the conversation.
Yes, I think what you spoke about is like the last point around the corporations, like the big private corporations, as a ecosystem player, one of the roles that they play is actually being the consumers of goods and services produced by SMMEs, for example. One interesting thing that I have noted in some of the entrepreneurship development initiatives that I run is that if you take these technological entrepreneurs or digital entrepreneurs, you find that they're trying to create products or services, and obviously trying to compete with the likes of Google, or if they're into software, they're really competing with like Sage and all these, different makers. And when I make them realize, bigger established, yes, when I make them realize that these your big corporations in the country are making use of those bigger established developers, and those are who you're competing for if you're looking just at the local market. So I think what you're saying about corporations needing to be entrepreneurial, I think they can actually come and support entrepreneurs by buying from them, by creating enterprises out of the bigger corporations. That's one way to innovate, where a bigger company actually starts a smaller corporation or a smaller enterprise, to support entrepreneurship. What a big thing that I wanted to talk about today is also education and skills development. So one of the things that always baffles me is that as a country, we still don't really have a national skills development policy. So if you go to any organization, how they are developing graduates, how they are developing, like you said, when somebody gets into a new job, how they are trained in that new job and how they attain skills, it's really, everyone does it how they think it should be done. There's no standard way of doing that. And you've spoken about the need for skills development as an important part of entrepreneurship development. And I want us to dive deeper into that.
Okay, so and I think you heard me still speaking of the mesodynamics of our entrepreneurial economy, in that a lot of the unemployment that we have is actually structural unemployment. What is structural unemployment? Structural unemployment is when, what you are producing, the skills that you're producing don't exactly match industry, okay? So I sometimes feel like, that's where we should start the conversation, to say what we are producing out of our institutions of higher learning are they meeting the requirements of industry, okay? Excuse me. And as you would have it, throughout the world, and this is a global phenomenon, where you find that education always lags behind industry. I need to take water.
Okay.
It's a global phenomenon. So you'll always find that education is always a generation behind what is happening. And currently, it's even going to be more tricky in the world with digitization, where you find that we are producing graduates that are not ready for the work environment. Okay, and they're challenged in so many ways. And I think that's the same, Lesotho has the same challenge. I mean, I always say, for me, how many lawyers are we going to produce as a country? Because you have so many of them here and so many of them that are not employed. And you look at our country, so for instance, we are called the water table of Africa or Southern Africa, but we don't have anything that speaks to the aquatics or aquatic economy, or anything that is focused on water. Do you understand? We were at some point one of the biggest textile industry, but none of our institutions have, are producing artisans, or individuals that could actually go to occupy space in the textile industry. If anything, even now, and this is an industry that started in the 80s, even now, you can't even point to Basotho that are running, that industry. So there really is an apparent mismatch of what is happening. So I think from the curriculum, the school's curriculum and our education, we need to tailor it in such a way that we first of all, we match what the requirement of industry is, but it's also aligned to the developmental plan of the country. And so that plan needs to be in place. And so, for instance, if we want to, I know there's four sectors or pillars of the economy. Agriculture is one of them. If we are saying that we want to focus on that pillar, what are we doing as far as investment in our education sector, as far as agriculture is concerned? For instance, now urbanization has taken over, and young people don't think studying agriculture or going to agricultural college is the most, I don't know, fashionable or smart thing to do. So it's again going back to how we structure the economy and how we structure our education system to be able to speak to that particular economy.
Awesome. And
the other thing, before I finish this point, the other thing maybe that we need to talk about as well is brain gain strategy. Lesotho suffers so much from a brain drain. Guys, it's no joke, the people that are educated by this country, that have gone through our education system, that were also beneficiary of our free education tertiary model, they've gone to South Africa and elsewhere in the world, and now the world is so open, so people can go anywhere that they want. For me, it's like, how do we start developing a strategy to gain that talent back? Talent pool is everything. Talent is everything. So you have to have a pool of talent to be able to develop yourself economically.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think going back to the policy point that you raised, I mean, that's where government policy can play a role. I think one of the countries that I think there was from Zimbabwe, who was talking about how he's in this committee that is thinking about how to make use of the Zimbabwean diaspora, even as they are not like in the country, but just making better use of their skills, making better use of their resources. And I know there's so many people in the diaspora, for example, who create capital generation strategies for businesses that are like in their own countries, or even market access, where they connect people that that are in their local countries to the people that are in the international countries where they reside. So I think if we have a proper policy and strategy around how to make use of Basotho that are not in the country, and also how to get them back, how do we get those skills? We need
Look
to
at this.
incentivize them, adequately. So I want to cut you on that and talk about the NUL Innovation Hub. I've been quite interested in the work that they're doing, and I think they're doing such a great work. However, the question that I will ask myself is, the role of universities, for example. What I know is that they do a good job of incubating these businesses and then helping them get to market. But my interest is what happens after that. I feel like their role of a unique role of knowledge, like just creating knowledge and research, and then we obviously need other players to then get on board after that to make sure that these great ideas and businesses that are started in the innovation hub and to access markets beyond whatever markets they're accessing. And I don't think a university has the capacity anyway to function as a corporate, so that's where an ecosystem also can play a bigger role.
Sure.
Now, I want us to get into opportunities, and if you want to add more points, you can add them there as well. I think we've spoken about a lot of challenges, but what I always love, and I know you also love this as well, is to talk about what opportunities exist, through the challenges that are there. So I always look at a country like Nigeria. Like if you speak to any Nigerian, they'll tell you all these challenges that they have with their government and their governmental leaders and blah, blah, blah. But then you look at how entrepreneurial they are and how successful they are. And I mean, of course, we know Nigeria is such a big country, but I think it's an example of a country where people sort of maneuver the challenges that exist and become innovative and say, how are we going to make an opportunity of these challenges that exist? What do you think are the opportunities that our challenges present in the country in terms of our entrepreneurship ecosystem, and what can we prioritize? I always say post-COVID, because I feel like after COVID-19 will be this new world. So we can prioritize post-COVID.
It is very difficult to speak around anything right now without mentioning COVID. And I know that actually our conversation was supposed to be anchored on where we are currently. And to your point about the innovation hubs, which is still, this is part of the opportunities and the solutions that we're going to profile. I think for me, it's such an amazing time this is for us to organize ourselves. Do you know what I mean? To really restructure and organize ourselves. When you speak of the NUL innovation hubs, what is the challenge there really is an end-to-end solution. Do you know what I mean? You really need, when you implement a plan, you need to always think beyond the plan, the implementation of it, but just really look at it with like a roving eye or an eagle's eye sort of perspective to say, how is this value chain going to work? Look at just how brilliant Cuba and how Cuba is shining right now in the time of COVID in terms of they're supplying doctors all over the place. 219 doctors has just landed in South Africa, and this was a plan that came from the institutions of higher learning institutions, but there was political will and policy to support that sort of thing. It is actually an $11 billion industry. Cuba supplying the world with that sort of resource. So I think there is an opportunity right now in the time of well, at least in the post-COVID world, in that it has sort of shown the world how, and countries like Lesotho, how unprepared we can be. But for me, pandemics throughout history have always come and gone. And we have realized how resilient, we are as humanity. So we know that this thing is going to go. So then we have an opportunity to design the world that we want after this pandemic. The other thing as well, I mean, we know that there's going to be recessionary times because pandemics are always characterized by pandemics, by recessions, but we have shown ourselves to be quite resilient. We've overcome the Great Depression of the 1920s. We've overcome the economic meltdown of 2008. So we know this is going to pass. So what then? And what then really for me is the exciting part. It's the opportunities that are going to be there. It is said that the era of Renaissance and Enlightenment came immediately after the Black Plague. It is said that Isaac Newton actually developed the theory of relativity and optics during the plague. So you get a sense that in the history of the world there is this event that happened and the world is never the same. Our economies are never the same. It is said that the feudal political system was changed after a big pandemic had happened. So then what is the opportunity post-COVID? So for me, what I would do, especially in the context of Lesotho, I would, first of all, remodel our economy. I would literally remodel our economy and say, guys, how do we move from an economy where really it is an economy that feels like it's outsourced? Okay, it's an economy that feels like it's a phantom economy. So it's there because there is economic activity, but if you really look at the ownership patterns of it, we don't really own it. So 50 years from now, if we don't restructure the economy, we'll realize we're in the same space that we are now. We'll still be a poor nation. We'll still be at least developed country. So I would go back to the drawing board and say, can we? And I know that there's white papers like your NSDP2, but the problem sometimes the challenge with this sort of papers is they end up becoming white elephants, because really it's the spirit of the document that is important, more important than the letter itself. So we've had NSDP1, which really has not worked out that well. For me, I still say that what is the one single-minded economic plan and vision for this country? Once we can button that down, for me, it opens a big opportunity in terms of how we can go. I say this because sometimes I'm not sure whether we are a social welfare economy, and this is not to say that there is no place for social justice and social protection, but it's to say that, guys, the policies that, when you look at the past 10, 20 years or so, the policies that we have really implemented and we have really come up with seems to be somehow gravitating to the left and a more socialist sort of agenda. If that's the case, then let us know. Let us know that that's the direction that we're moving it into, and let us develop a thorough economic plan and policy that is based on that. So I would start there. Secondly, I would introduce, if I was a policymaker, I would introduce a domestic economic empowerment policy. Localization of an economy is the biggest thing into overhauling and changing the economy of a country. So I would develop a very tough protectionist agenda. Again, countries like your China, countries like your Ethiopia, countries like Botswana that are growing at a very fast economically are countries that have a very strong indigenization plan in their economy. Okay. Again, I would also still going back to structure. I would not necessarily go back to the drawing boards. Okay. I would focus on Lesotho. I would develop a startup economy. literally make Lesotho a startup a nation, so to speak. And by the startup economy, I'm talking about digital economy. I'm talking about the fact that the reality is that the world is going digital. It's just been said in this time of lockdown that there's increase in digital economy. The rate of growth there is indicative of where the world economy is going. So we'll definitely need to make sure that we have a very strong digital strategy and economy. And yeah, I mean, there's a big things that we could do in terms of mobilization of capital. There's big things that we could do in terms of structuring skills development. And I say that because quickly because we're wrapping. So there is ample, I think there is ample
cool.
opportunity for us.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you've covered a lot of things, but what I find interesting, the part where you talk about, you know, whether we are like a socialist economy or country, for me there, I think there lies an opportunity as well, as we've spoken in, you know, two previous conversations that I had here on Facebook, around the social issues that we have as a country. And I think where we need to move our entrepreneurship is where, you know, people are sort of going into business, just looking at what's a quick thing I can do, to transforming that thinking and thinking about how do I solve some of the societal challenges that exist, right?
Yeah.
Because that's where the opportunities should be. So if people have lack of access to healthcare, if there's high unemployment rates, if there's a lack of skills development, you know, meaning our education system has issues, then those are entrepreneurial opportunities. If somebody can figure out how to solve those problems in a very affordable way, in a way that is accessible to the bulk of our population, and even, you know, beyond, because like we spoke about the need to export, right, to export our products and our services.
Yeah.
So if we can think about all the social issues that exist and think about how to serve them or solve them in a more innovative way than has been done previously, then I think that's where the opportunities lie. Now, on the, I just want us to conclude with another point, that something I've realized, that in Lesotho, some of the social challenges are being solved by NGOs or development partners, you know, with giving like grant money. And what I've seen is that this is also, it sort of creates competition for entrepreneurs, because now instead of sort of leaving that space to be the gap to be filled by entrepreneurs with their innovative solutions, we have an NGO coming with grant money and solving that problem and giving it to people for free. And I think it ties in with your point around, are we, if we're a socialist economy, then let's be that. If we're not, then let's create opportunities for people to build solutions, and then, you know, empower people to be able to buy, sell those solutions or whatever. I think it's a very interesting, yeah, contrast that we have.
Yeah, I mean, I always tread very carefully on this subject because I also don't want to come across as a capitalist or too much of it. I have challenges with you know, a lot of some of the social programs because they feed into the whole machine of aid, and I mean aid versus trade versus, you know, private sector investment and private sector development, aid versus, you know, industrial development, aid versus you know, tangible you know, economic solutions to some of the problems that we have. I mean, every day when you look at, you watch the news, LTV, you always see some minister or the other accepting a sort of grant and a sort of, you know, aid from somewhere. And for me, the sort of, you are damaging generations of and future populations. For me, it's a bigger conversation than just receiving money. And I think sometimes the development partners I don't know if they realize this, but I think this is the onus is on us, where you then now start socializing your people and conditioning them to receive aid and sort of all the time. I think for me, that's psychologically problematic, but to begin with. But secondly, it is not sustainable. It goes back to the issue of teach a man how to fish instead of giving him fish all the time. So we can't be a developmental state, so to speak, and be this dependent on aid. While I also know that in a country as poor as ours, we do need some of those social programs, because there are people, the reality is there are people that would die, you know, if those programs are not there. But for me, it's our approach to them and our long-term relationship and strategy with such programs. And also, like, again, you're saying this is derailing progress as far as entrepreneurship is concerned, because you're curtailing the growth of businesses, because you are almost not giving the people the opportunity to enterprise. You know what I mean? And by offering solutions that are not sustainable in the long term. So I think we need to be talking sustainable economic development in the long term. And I think aid is not a solution to that.
All right, cool. I'll just go through a few comments. We'll take like 4 more minutes because I think we didn't really start on time. So someone is talking about the fact that like COVID-19 obviously has made people realize that they need to have digital skills. And so she's just wondering if SMMEs that, like we spoke about how our SMMEs generally are not really conversant with technology. They're not using technology in a you know, complicated or complex way or sophisticated way. So, you know, she's just worried around, like, let's say accountants, and the type of businesses that are going to be impacted by people realizing in the country that they have to be more digital, or companies being more digital. But I think we covered that when we spoke about skills development. Then someone was talking about how, you know, SMMEs have to consider, you know, just how they structure themselves, you know, around corporate governance and those kind of things. And I think that speaks to policy. It speaks to, you know, what, but at the same time, like when you read like books like Lean Startup and stuff like that, you don't really want to over-regulate startups, because then that doesn't enhance their ability to start businesses and fail, and then try something else. So I think we need to sort of meet a certain balance. Any last words? I don't see any other comments, so any last words?
Sure. I happen to be a mentor at the VIP, Vodacom Innovation Park. And I always sit with the guys to say, and most of them are obviously tech guys, I always say to them, guys, even if you employ tech, try to, this is not Silicon Valley, this is Lesotho. Try to make sure that you are relevant to your context. So you need to be able to have a tech business that is answering some of the challenges that your ecosystem is conversant with, you know. So it's not just about coming up with an app, you know. It is about coming up with digital technology that's going to enhance you know, the ecosystem, but also your customer experience. So I think people need to start thinking along the confines and the perimeters of businesses of the future, but the businesses that would be relevant to this market. But I think it's going to be a very exciting world. Robotics are going to be a reality, and so how do we, as nations, how do we as entrepreneurs, how do we as citizens make sure that, and policymakers alike, that we usher ourselves into that world?
I think each and every ecosystem player has really a role to play, and something to about our financiers, the skills developers, educations, and professional services companies, and all the other support structures that exist really to create a better ecosystem. I am looking for a question that was asked that looks like we haven't really answered it. I don't really see it. Toby, I don't see your question, but I mean, we can answer in the comments afterwards. Like everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for engaging in this conversation with us. There'll be like just this was actually such a broad topic, I think, but I think we tried to tackle different elements of it, but there's more to unpack. Like this is such a big topic, there's more to unpack, and we'll be back to unpack a lot of these issues that we're dealing with currently. I wanted us to talk about the informal sectors and the informal sector, and whether we are comfortable, with having an informal sector, and if we think it's sustainable to have it the way we have it. I mean, there's so many other things, but we will be back to talk about them. If you have any ideas for topics, please share them with me. I will try and have this every second Tuesday, so not next week, but the week after that. If you have any people that you'd like to talk to, please follow in the comments, and also if you have an idea of what we should call this show. It's currently lunchtime talks, but I'd like to come up with a better name. So if you have any ideas, please also share in there. Really open to hearing what content you'd like to see on here. Fanana, thank you so much for joining us. Happy to talk to you next time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I know it was a bit clunky in the beginning because we were thrown by technology, but I really enjoyed myself, and I think we need to have this sort of conversations going. As you said, there's a plethora of things that we could possibly talk about. This topic is so expansive because it's not just entrepreneurship, it's the economy as well, because you can't separate the two, and also where we are. I mean, we didn't even get a chance to speak about the agrarian economy, which is something that I'm very, very passionate about. But we will, as you said, we will get an opportunity to have to have a series of this, and yeah, I'm looking forward to them.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.